What if I told you that the American dollar isn't on top because of innovation or democracy? What if the secret to America's economic power for the last 50 years was a single deal made in the desert? A deal where America traded its military might for the world's money. This is the story of how the United States, facing economic collapse, engineered a system that forced the globe to buy its currency. A system that fundamentally rewired global power, and whose quiet end is now shaking the foundations of our world. To really get how huge this deal was, you have to go back to the early 1970s. The American century felt like it was coming to a disastrous end. The country was stuck in the Vietnam War, and the economy was in a tailspin. Inflation was out of control, the stock market had crashed, and nobody trusted the government. But the biggest crisis was the US dollar itself. Since World War II, the world's finances ran on something called the Bretton Woods Agreement. This basically meant the US dollar was tied to gold at a fixed rate, and every other major currency was tied to the dollar. The dollar was literally as good as gold. But after decades of spending on wars and social programs, the US had printed way more money than it could ever back with its gold reserves. Other countries, especially France, saw the writing on the wall and started showing up with shiploads of dollars demanding gold in return, draining America's vaults. So, on August 15, 1971, President Nixon made a shocking announcement. He was severing the dollar's link to gold. This Nixon shock threw the global financial system into chaos. The US dollar, the bedrock of the world economy, was now backed by nothing but the full faith and credit of a government that was losing credibility fast. It needed a new anchor for the dollar. For oil-producing nations, this was a catastrophe. They were getting paid for their only valuable resource in a currency that was losing value by the day. Then came the breaking point. In October 1973, responding to America's support for Israel in the Yom Kippur War, the Arab members of OPEC did the unthinkable. They declared an oil embargo against the United States and its allies. The price of oil nearly quadrupled almost overnight, rocketing from around $3 to nearly $12 a barrel. Gas lines snaked for blocks. The global economy stalled, and the US was pushed to the edge of an economic abyss. America had lost control. Its industrial might wasn't enough. Its currency was failing. With the crisis at its peak, a series of high-stakes diplomatic maneuvers were set in motion. In June of 1974, these efforts culminated in the establishment of the US-Saudi Arabian Joint Commission on Economic Cooperation, a pact announced by US Secretary of State Henry Kissinger and Saudi Prince Fahd. Publicly, it was about promoting cooperation in trade, industrialization, and technology. Privately, it laid the groundwork for a deal that would redefine global power for the next half-century. The framework was elegantly simple. On one side, the United States would offer Saudi Arabia an ironclad military guarantee. America would sell the kingdom its most advanced weaponry and provide absolute protection for its monarchy and its oil fields. In exchange, Saudi Arabia would do two things. First, they would agree to price all of their oil sales in US dollars. Through its massive influence, this would informally lead the rest of OPEC to follow suit over time. This might sound trivial, but the effect was monumental. Any country that wanted to buy oil now had to get US dollars first. But the second part of the deal was the masterstroke, a component kept secret for decades. Saudi Arabia would take the billions of petrodollars it was earning from soaring oil sales and use them to buy US government debt. This created a perfect, closed loop. This strategic alignment gave birth to what we now call the petrodollar system. It created a massive, artificial, and permanent global demand for the US dollar. Think of it this way. The US dollar became the default operating system for global energy. If you were a country like Japan or Germany that needed oil to run your economy, you couldn't just pay in yen or marks. You first had to go to the currency market and buy US dollars. This constant worldwide demand kept the dollar strong, even though it was no longer backed by gold. The dollar was now effectively backed by something the world needed even more: oil. This process became known as petrodollar recycling. Oil exporting nations would sell their oil, get a flood of US dollars, and then recycle those dollars back into the American economy, primarily by purchasing US Treasury bonds. This recycling mechanism was the key that unlocked America's exorbitant privilege. The United States could now run enormous trade deficits, buying way more from the world than it sold. and pay for it all with currency it could essentially print out of thin air. Any other country trying this would see its currency collapse. But for the US, the dollars it sent overseas for cars, electronics, and oil came right back to finance its own government's budget deficits. And the US military into the system's global security guard. They sent that same money back to Washington to buy our debt. This system allowed the US to fund massive military spending and domestic programs without raising taxes or suffering hyperinflation. The world was, in effect, forced to lend the United States money at low interest rates. And this brings us back to the warships. The military protection promised to Saudi Arabia wasn't just a perk, it was the enforcement mechanism. The US Navy, by protecting the sea lanes through which all this oil flowed, was now implicitly guaranteeing the entire system. The dollar wasn't just backed by oil, it was backed by oil and aircraft carriers. The deal had turned the OPEC cartel from an adversary into America's banker. For 50 years, this system has been the bedrock of American hegemony. But today, the world is changing, and the foundations of the petrodollar system are cracking. While there was no single formal 50-year treaty that expired, the 50-year anniversary of the 1974 agreements on June 9, 2024, has become a powerful symbol for a clear and accelerating trend. Saudi Arabia is now actively looking to sell oil and other goods in multiple currencies, including the Chinese yuan, euros, and yen. This is part of a broader movement known as de-dollarization. Major global powers, particularly the expanded BRICS nations, which now include Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, and the UAE, are actively building ways to trade outside the US dollar system. They are creating alternative payment systems and increasing trade in their own local currencies. There are a few reasons for this shift. First, thanks to its own shale revolution, the United States is no longer as dependent on Middle Eastern oil. Second, rivals like China and Russia view the dollar's dominance as a weapon that can be used against them through sanctions. And for Saudi Arabia, this is about diversification. It no longer wants its entire economic fate tied to decisions made in Washington. The secret deal born out of the 1974 agreements was one of the most brilliant and consequential strategic moves of the 20th century. It replaced gold with oil as the backing for the dollar and locked the world into a system that secured American dominance for generations. It allowed America to trade the promise of military protection for a seemingly endless river of money. But that era is now ending. The slow erosion of the petrodollar system means the slow erosion of demand for US debt, which could lead to higher interest rates and inflation in America. The exorbitant privilege is fading. For half a century, the dollar was backed by oil and warships. The question we are all now forced to ask is, what will it be backed by next?